If you're new here, hello, I'm Jake, and while I run through this full day of training, I realise I've got quite a lot of my background over on Instagram and on short form content, but not really much on YouTube in long form. So I thought I'd run over that while we go through this full hybrid day of strength, skill, and hypertrophy-based training all mixed in one. So about 7 years ago, I was not even doing calisthenics. I was actually doing MMA and fighting competitively, and I was just starting out my career practicing as a sports chiro, and I felt like I needed to make a swap. I was getting more and more health educated, getting more and more into doing what I could nutritionally and supplementally to try and help with longevity. And all at the same time, there was just more and more research coming out about head trauma, CTE, long-term impacts of brain damage. And that was all while I was turning up to training and sparring twice a week, getting hit in the head, and just thinking to myself every time when I'd go home, how long do I really want to do this for? So after biting the bullet and finally dropping it, I went through a bit of a period of not really knowing what to do, sport-wise, fitness-wise, hobby-wise. I think I was literally doing, on one day of the week, 2 sets of pull-ups, and then another day just 2 sets of push-ups, just high-rep stuff, trying to go close to failure, just to try and feel like I was still doing something to stay fit, but not really having any direction as to where that was going to go. I was still doing a little bit of weight training with a friend, like once every couple of weeks. He could bring me in for a guest session, commercial gym, bodybuilding style session, and I had learnt a lot about training, and at least the bodybuilding side of it, training with him for those few years that I was doing that really casually. But getting down to the public park, just as a couple of one-offs with my brother and a few friends during summer, getting outside, fresh air, trying some freestyle tricks on the bars, pretty quickly, as soon as I started doing some of that, realizing how fun those sessions were, and then spending the shortest amount of time online just seeing what people were doing and how broad calisthenics really was, a little taste of that got me hooked pretty much instantly. Pretty quick, I was onto that 3-4 days a week training, getting the friends in. It was all pure bodyweight to start with, just trying to be a complete calisthenics purist, pretty classic style of high reps, high volume. We were doing push-pull leg splits, I think, for a long time. It was 3 to 4 sets of pretty much everything. I don't think there was really anything less than 10 reps almost ever. It was all 10, 15, 20 rep sets, all super close to failure. But as time went on, I learned more. And once I started bringing in a little bit of weighted calisthenics and picked up a weight belt and a few weights to go with it, pretty quickly those sets and reps started to reduce. And as I started reducing those reps and making my sets a bit more strength focused, but still keeping the intensity high, and then playing around with reducing that volume so I weren't just burning out an entire muscle group all in one day with 15 to 20 sets, the results I got just really started to skyrocket. And in that first couple of years, there was still a lot of classic calisthenics stuff going on. Like managed to hit some front levers and a bit of a sloppy straddle planche in that first couple of years of training, but the more I got hooked on weighted calisthenics, the more I started training with other friends as well who were a bit more diverse in their interests, wanted to hit some bench, wanted to do some bodybuilding training. The program got a bit more mixed and it kept it interesting for me too. Still, pretty much always, I've only trained with maybe about 20, maximum 30% of weighted exercises as part of my own program. Calisthenics goals have always been the forefront of what's been a motivator for me, and luckily I found interest in pretty much a strength goal for almost every single muscle group. Like biceps, we'd be hitting pelican curls with the goals of hitting Hephaestos one day. We'd be doing supinated back levers for biceps. I was hitting dips and impossible dips for triceps. Obviously things like shoulders, you've got handstand push-ups that are a goal in there, pull-ups and front levers hitting your back as well. So all of that was a primary driver, meaning that I never really felt like just swapping over to weights altogether, because it was never going to be as specific as I wanted it to be to those core calisthenics goals I had. I hit a couple of major calisthenics weighted goals that I had, hitting a 120 kilo dip and cracking over a 70 kilo chin up. Since then, I've pivoted back to being a bit more of a bodyweight purist, focusing more on things like one-arm pull-ups, really explosive, super clean muscle-ups, high reps of slow muscle ups, keeping my form and tempo super clean. Push goals, I wanted to get really good and consistent at not just regular handstand push-ups or handstand push-ups on bars, but super deep handstand push-ups, sets of 90-degree push-ups, and more recently, just over the last few months, actually going back to training some static planche holds. This time working much better on trying to perfect technique, not pushing them as hard as I used to push them in terms of proximity to failure per set like I did in that first couple of years. That ended up with me having a straddle planche, but a super sloppy one, wanting to get really good clean motor patterns down, build really good foundations for some high level pure bodyweight push skills like planche holds, planche raises, planche push-ups. And today, this Saturday session is a perfect example of how this shift in focus has changed my training and forced me to really learn how to mix strength, skill, hypertrophy while managing fatigue and maintaining previous skills that I've got, which is all such an expression of where you often get to when you're trying to be a broad calisthenics athlete athlete who covers a lot of bases and wants to put all of this together in your training and still make it work. At the moment, muscle-ups are on maintenance for me, but they are unique because they're a power movement. They require a whole lot of speed, which means execution and high-level nervous system output is required for practicing these and keeping that explosive skill that you'll just lose even if you're still training some other pull movements. So these come up first in the session, 3 rep sets, super low RPE, super high reps in reserve, making sure that I'm way far away from failure, but that every rep is as explosive as possible with a solid amount of rest in between, so I can just keep that motor pattern fresh and make sure that my body and my brain knows how to produce that power and speed and doesn't lose it if I just stick to slower regular pull-up rep training. Movements like this that have a huge skill component to them always require you to be fresh, require your nervous system to not be operating under a lot of fatigue if you want to develop these really good core, if you want to develop these really good movement patterns and the coordination demands that you need to get practiced at this movement, which is why 90-degree push-ups come up next. Similar to these muscle-ups, we're hitting them at low RPE, meaning I'm only doing single or double reps on these, keeping another 1 to 2 reps in the tank, trying to just keep every rep clean, give myself a long break in between, and racking up a total of 8 to 10 reps. So I still get a decent volume of practice, but all of that practice is super high quality and it's not incredibly fatiguing because I didn't push anything too close to failure or start practicing bad form or bad habits. The theme of these workouts and the theme of what should probably be your workouts too is anything that's got a high skill demand to it, anything that's a primary strength goal, anything that's got power involved. It needs to be early in the workout. It needs to be while you're fresh. You want to be having good rests in between. You don't want to be pushing things to failure or too close to failure too soon because you will create the type of fatigue that's going to limit those benefits and those gains that you're going to get from that session. The muscle ups and 90-degree push-ups are the biggest ones of these today. And after that second or third exercise, everything else in the session is going to be more stable, more hypertrophy focused movements. But that doesn't mean that you have to completely deviate away from your skill and your actual strength goals. Each of these exercises are only 2 sets. They're all working within the 5 to 6 rep range, keeping it quite strength specific, but allowing yourself to get close enough to failure with good enough technique that it's going to produce a ton of muscle growth. Movements like front lever pulls, front lever raises, back squats, dips. These all definitely have decent technical demands, but not like an explosive muscle up, not like a handstand push-up variation or a 90-degree push-up. And the risk of pushing these super close to failure, maybe aside from back squats, is a whole lot lower than what you'd get from having form breakdown on something like a 90-degree push-up or on a Hefesto. So for me, these strike the perfect balance of being able to produce effective, reliable muscle growth in the muscles that I need for my main movements safely at the same time, while also still acting to keep some amount of maintenance of previous skills I've learned, like front levers and front lever pulls and dips, so that as my focus shifts between programs, I don't just completely lose that motor pattern and lose all that practice of that movement because I've got a different focus for this 12-week program. These days, I almost don't think about whether the movement's weighted or unweighted, because honestly, those things don't matter to me and they probably shouldn't matter to you either. The biggest thing that you can educate yourself on that will help you hit your goals faster is understanding why you're doing each exercises. Rather than trying to balance arbitrary things like whether it's weighted or unweighted, try and understand what the actual adaptation is that you're trying to go for with that exercise and then work out the most efficient path to get there. If it's something like a handstand push-up, you need a combination of adaptations. You need good balance. You need the actual practice of the movement itself to stabilize all those different points from top to bottom of the push-up. But you also need muscle in the right places. You need solid front delts and you need strong triceps. And the stronger those are, the bigger those muscles are, the easier the demands are for the coordination component because you've got more raw strength to work with. So rather than just hammering out handstand push-ups, the better way to think about this is keeping your handstand push-up sets purely skill-based, meaning that you pick a pretty difficult variation for yourself, you keep the load pretty high so that it's specific to the types of demands that you're going to actually dealing with when you're trying those harder handstand push-up sets, but you stay far away from failure. You make sure that movement quality and execution and form and balance is your number one priority, and you pull the pin on the set and stay far away from failure so that there's almost no technique breakdown and it's only those good reps and only those good coordination patterns that you're building. This absolutely means that you'll lose out on some muscle growth in those sets, but that shouldn't be the primary goal of that set anyway. That's where you bring in something more efficient for that muscle growth, whether it's pike push-ups or something like a weighted variation like an overhead press, a dumbbell press, or any kind of stable, more isolating front delt or tricep building movement that's going to give you those muscular adaptations that you do want in a much more efficient way where you can push it close to failure without stability being the limiting factor so that your muscles actually get that growth that you want rather than trying to smush it all together into one set and one exercise alone. This means that you will end up working working with different reps and set ranges. You will have different volumes for each of these types of goals and adaptations depending on what the purpose of the exercise is that you're choosing. And if you can mix these with some other exercises that fill those gaps and target those muscles that you're not hitting with these, or hit those ranges of motion that you're missing, you'll get the ideal combination of strength, skill, and balanced muscle growth in the most sustainable way that gets you to where you want to be long term.